Frid vänner, här kommer det en extra uppdatering från Israel med 2 videoklipp, en med Yair Pinto och en med Erik Stackelberg med svensk text. Kan bara tilläggas att det laddas upp ordentligt. Det smäller visst i Damaskus i Syrien och man förstår väl att Israel kan ligga bakom. Sen har det också kommit fram att Israel nu är i högsta beredskap. Flygvapnet extra då, och det är så att man har gått ut med i staden Gush Dan i centrala Israel att man överväger att öppna de offentliga skyddsrummen i kväll. Och Israels säkerhetstjänst har väl snappat upp någonting och det här måste vi lägga ut i alla fall nu. Gud välsigna er. Så håller vi oss till Jesus och så ber vi för Israel, vänner. De behöver vår förbön i det här läget. Amen, så hörs vi.
A UAV attack on Israel's southern city Eilat. The Jewish state puts a laser beam into use against these sort of attacks. The IDF commando force launched another operation at the hospital in the El Amal neighborhood in the Gaza Strip. And why does it seem like there is so much drama regarding the entrance to Rafah? I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your boots on the ground report about what is happening in Israel on the 180th day of the war with Hamas and Hezbollah. We must address the regrettable incident that occurred yesterday, involving the unfortunate loss of 6 aid workers, including both foreign nationals and Palestinians, due to gunfire from the IDF in Gaza. The investigation highlights a scenario where the IDF encountered a challenging situation on the battlefield. 3 vehicles were seen following an aid truck with armed individuals positioned on top. In the darkness of the night, one of the trucks fired at the IDF troops. Recognizing the cars as possible threats, the soldiers reacted with fire. In the resulting crossfire, civilians in the area were harmed. The Israeli Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, commented overnight on the investigation that was presented to him about the death of 7 workers of the Global Central Kitchen Aid Organization.
Last night, 7 employees of the World Central Kitchen were killed. WCK is an organization whose people work across the globe, including in Israel, to do good in difficult conditions. The IDF works together closely with the World Central Kitchen and greatly appreciates the important work that they do. The IDF completed a preliminary debrief. I want to be very clear. The strike was not carried out with the intention of harming WCK aid workers. It was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in a very complex conditions. It shouldn't have happened. We will share in full transparency the findings of the investigation with the World Central Kitchen and other international relevant organizations. We see great importance in the continued delivery of humanitarian aid, and we will keep working to facilitate this vital effort.
I personally want to address all those voices demanding an immediate stop to Israel's operations in Gaza. It's not feasible and it's not realistic. This conflict has already claimed the lives of over 600 soldiers with thousands of civilian deaths and kidnappings. Allowing this conflict to end without a resolution, as has happened many times in the past, would only set the stage for another significant conflict in the future, causing more loss of life. We can't forget that Hamas is a terrorist organization that is using Palestinians as human shields for dozens of years. With Hamas in charge of the Gaza Strip, there is no future for the Palestinian people and no possibility for peace with Israel. While we persist in this defensive war, we are faced with increasing anti-Israel demonstrations and condemnations from all over the globe. This is incomprehensible to me personally. considering that any nation subjected to such a barbaric attack like what happened on October 7 would do anything to prevent something like this from ever happening again. I can't think of any nation that would tolerate this, and never mind not retaliating and trying to retrieve our hostages. Many experts speak highly about Israel's ability to minimize civilian casualties and its policies in this war in order to do so. Sadly though, the haters shout more loudly, especially when isolated incidents like this one take place. That is why I am asking you to unite with us for the sake of the truth. Share our videos on YouTube, subscribe to this channel, and follow us on social media. Please take a second and click on the follower button. Thank you so much for your support, and please join us in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. Getting back to the news from the Gaza Strip, where the IDF is operating in the El Amal neighborhood of Khan Yunis. The raids are carried out in the most precise way possible and have led to the elimination of dozens of terrorists and the discovery of large stockpiles of weapons and ammunition. In addition, soldiers from the Egoz unit have arrested dozens of terrorists who left Nassar Hospital and were transferred for further investigation to the 504 Intelligence Division and the Israeli Shin Bet Agency. The forces also completed sweeps of the Nasser and El Amal Hospital in order to make sure that the terrorist organization Hamas did not re-establish its infrastructure there, as happened in the Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. Meanwhile, Israel is developing a solution against the UAV attacks. The new system uses a laser to track and destroy incoming UAVs. This development is coming to light just 2 days after the unusual attack in Damascus attributed to Israel, in which a senior Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards official, Mohammad Reza Zehadi, was eliminated. Israel is closely watching the skies in anticipation of incoming UAVs, which is the preferred method of attacks by Iran and its terrorist proxies in the region. The threat of UAVs has already been seen in this war, as Israeli airspace has been infiltrated by aircraft launched from Syria and Lebanon, as well as from more distant destinations such as Yemen and Iraq. Most of Israel's air defense systems have been developed to counter missiles, so UAVs are a different problem. These UAVs, sometimes called suicide drones, are difficult to detect and shoot down because they fly low and slow, unlike cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Also, UAVs have a low radar profile, which makes them hard to detect at a distance, and they also have the ability to maneuver in a flight. The solution Israel has come up with is a laser to track and burn the incoming UAVs out of the sky, and we are very close to having a laser which is ready to be used in the field. This is a good place to tell you that this weekend, a special episode of my new series, My State, will talk about the attempted blockade of the Red Sea by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen and how Israel found a way around it. Stay tuned for this episode. Switching focus to Israel's diplomatic efforts, this week Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met with his counterpart, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Washington. According to the report in The Times, the United States believes that Hamas rule in Rafah can be eradicated by taking the following steps: targeting and hitting the heads of Hamas and the organization's leadership in the city, reliable and effective steps to evacuate the population from Rafah, full security of the border between Rafah and Egypt, the destruction of the smuggling tunnels connecting Rafah and Egypt, and increasing the humanitarian aid flows into the city. This last item will need careful planning, as we know Hamas likes to hijack humanitarian aid shipments meant for the Palestinian civilian population. Meanwhile, the American plan has several other details on which opinions are divided among Israelis. The main difference in opinion comes from the form of evacuation of Rafah. According to the Americans, a floating island will be built and about 1 million people will live on it. In principle, Israel reached an understanding with the United States, Egypt, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates that some of the residents of Rafah would be evacuated and housed in tents and some on a floating island to be built west of Gaza. 25,000 tents will be erected in each village and a total of 1 million people will stay in them. The plan will enable the operation of the IDF and prevent the immigration of refugees to Egypt, which among other things will also be responsible for determining the identity of the heads of the local authorities and protecting the residents. According to reports in the Arab media, the Egyptians want only one thing: to guarantee directly that the operation will not push any displaced Palestinians to cross the border towards Sinai. And on this basis, the talks led to this integrated plan to host hundreds of thousands of Gazans. The reports also said Israel obtained conditional American and Egyptian approval for the operation. Additional details were part of a report in a Lebanese newspaper which said that Egyptian authorities will undertake the process of establishing camps, erecting tents, and temporary sanitation centers, in addition to American and Saudi-funded water supply centers. At the end of the previous week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu instructed the IDF and the security establishment to prepare for the expansion of the war and to prepare an action plan for the evacuation of the civilian population in the city of Rafah.
אנחנו ניכנס לרפיח ונשיג את הניצחון המוחלט.
This is in order to allow our forces to operate in the area and destroy the 4 Hamas battalions that still remain in the southernmost city of the Gaza Strip. This situation is very difficult and keeps changing daily. Please stay tuned to our reports and join us in prayer. Together, we need to share the truth and stay united in order for Israel to win the public opinion battle as well as the battles in Gaza. God is good, and together we will win. Thank you for your prayers, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBS.
An Iranian proxy carried out, and Israel began, and we saw the fruits of that on Monday with the takeout of Mohammad Reza Zahedi. Israel began upping its attacks in Syria. And we've talked about here in the newscast over the past several weeks that Iranian sources on the ground in Syria have said, wow, Israel is basically shooting to kill. I mean, they're really upping their attacks. They're going after more high-value targets and with greater just barrages of firepower that they're using in Syria. So it was a noticeable increase by Israel in Syria, and for good reason. October 7th does not happen without the Iranian regime. And you might say, well, Eric, I've seen some reports that Iran didn't know that this was coming, that October 7th surprised them. Well, maybe Hamas moved a little sooner than Iran thought they would, maybe without Iran knowing. Maybe Iran didn't give the order, but Iran planned to give the order. Hamas may have gotten ahead of themselves. Okay, put all that aside. At the end of the day, Iran knew this was coming eventually. They knew October 7th was coming eventually. Why do I say that? Well, a few weeks before October 7th, we had some 500 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives in Iran training. I wonder what they were training for. It wasn't for the Olympics. It was for an eventual attack against the world's one and only Jewish state. And Hezbollah to the north has been training for an October 7th style assault on Israel for decades. And this is all at the behest of the Iranian regime. I say all that to say, yeah, Israel has increased its attacks against Iran to send a message. Now, those attacks have mainly been in Syria and in Lebanon, Iranian assets in those two countries. But remember, Iran and Hezbollah are not the only actors in Syria. It's kind of a crossroads for rogue regimes. You've got, of course, Iran and Hezbollah there. They've been there, folks, and according to them, they're not going anywhere. So what you essentially have is a collision course between the Iranian axis and Israel over Syria. And the Assad regime, which rules over Syria, well, that might be a stretch, right? Which once ruled over Syria with an iron fist, which still maintains an iron fist, which is, although itself ruled over, the Assad regime, it answers to Iran and it answers to Russia. So you've got Iran, Hezbollah, the Assad regime itself, Russian forces, thousands of them have been in Syria since September 2015. Turkey is there, Erdogan. You've had al-Qaeda, ISIS elements obviously there throughout the years. And many, when I talked about this a little while ago, many commented, what about the United States? They are there too, and they weren't invited. It's okay that Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah are there because they were invited, but America wasn't invited. Well, guess what? ISIS wasn't invited into Syria either, nor was al-Qaeda. Initially, the American troop presence in Syria was because of that. And they'll still say, the Biden administration will still say, we're only in Iraq and Syria to make sure ISIS doesn't rear its head again and reconstitute itself. But that's why American forces entered Syria, because of ISIS. And they say they're still there because of ISIS, because of the threat of ISIS reconstituting itself. But folks, at the end of the day, the real threat in, say, eastern Syria and Iraq, where we have a U.S. troop presence and a small presence, about 900 soldiers in Syria, about a little over 2,000 in Iraq. The main reason they're there is to provide a buffer between Iran and the rest of the region. And that's the real reason. The Iranian regime and its proxies. Listen, I was in and around Mosul in northern Iraq, which was the main battlefield against ISIS some years ago, a decade ago. I was with the Kurdish Peshmerga, and they said, look, it just flipped overnight. ISIS was gone, the caliphate was disbanded, and Iranian-backed militias moved right in. So that is the main threat and the main concern of U.S. forces there now. And to me, if the U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria withdraw, then Iran has an easy pass across the region to the Mediterranean Sea, to Israel's doorstep. They've already done it. I mean, look, through Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So Iran really, in a lot of ways, folks, has accomplished its goal of establishing that arc, stretching from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean. They've encircled Israel with a ring of fire, as we've talked about many, many times. Whether it's Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis in Yemen. And now in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Iran trying to open a new front against Israel. But all of these rogue actors converge in Syria. So Israel has upped attacks in Syria against Iran and Hezbollah. Because if Israel doesn't do that, if Israel doesn't have freedom of movement in the skies above Syria, then Iran and Hezbollah will continue their long march to the Golan Heights. And they will do what they've done in southern Lebanon, which is establish a terror base on Israel's doorstep. It's already happened in Lebanon. Hezbollah has well over, at this point, 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. So it's already happened at this point in Lebanon. Israel says, no, we won't let you do it in southern Syria as well. We must push you back. That's first. Secondly, we must be able to intercept and destroy weapons convoys and highly advanced precision-guided munitions that Iran is trying to transit through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And whether it's the Houthis firing rockets and missiles at Eilat, whether it's another rocket hitting Eilat, the southernmost city in Israel, resort town, a beautiful resort town, by the way, on Sunday, launched from Iraq, apparently, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah. Folks, Israel's had enough. October 7th was the breaking point. of Iranian-sponsored terror against Israel. And Israel is now saying, you know what? It's one thing to hit back against the tentacles of the octopus, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad. But what about hitting back at the head of the octopus? And that would be Iran itself. And that brings us to the attack on Monday. And we'll get into Russia in a minute. This has prophetic implications, what's happening with Russia. Let's rewind to Monday real quick, April 1st, an earth-shaking, region-shaking event in the Middle East. And by the way, if you want to hear more about this kind of content, Stackleback Tonight, my brand new show on TBN, every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, with a re-air every night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you missed the first showing, you can certainly catch the second showing every Monday through Friday. And we dig into this a bunch on tomorrow night's show. We've got on-the-ground reporting from Israel. We'll break this down. You won't want to miss it. And tonight, by the way, we've got a report from London. We're going around the world, folks, on this show, Stackleback Tonight, my brand new show, just launched last week. And from London, we will talk about hate crime legislation in Scotland and soon to possibly be passed in Canada. Throughout the Western world, this is catching on. And if you have a biblical view on, say, human sexuality, and you dare to comment on it, you might be in a whole lot of legal trouble if these laws continue to pass. And as an American, my first question is, could it come here to the United States? You won't want to miss that tonight. Tomorrow, we're on the ground in Israel. Great stuff every night on Stackleback Tonight. But let's rewind to Monday. And again, that's 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 p.m. Eastern every weeknight on TBN and the TBN app, TBN Plus. Some of the facts. Mohammad Reza Zahedi, in a consulate, the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus, the Syrian capital, with a pinpoint strike, Israeli F-35s, the entire building apparently collapsed with him inside it, and 7 other members of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and some members from Hezbollah. Surprise, surprise. Now, Zahedi was the highest ranking, and Israel has taken several out since October 7th, but Zahedi was another level, highest ranking, really one of the highest ranking members of the Iranian regime, essentially in charge of all of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's terror operations throughout Syria and Lebanon. This was a very big fish who for decades had been behind terror attacks against Israel and Israeli interests. And the Iranian regime now is feeling this. They felt the death of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. They're feeling this. They felt the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in November 2020, who was the father of the Iranian bomb, Iran's nuclear program. This is big. It can't be underestimated. They are feeling this. And essentially, folks, I talked about taking it to the head of the octopus, right? We said it a minute ago. If you have an embassy, that is considered sovereign territory for that particular country. U.S. embassy in Pakistan or Russia or wherever, or England or the U.K., wherever, Ireland, it's sovereign U.S. territory. So basically, Israel struck Iran directly in Damascus, and a building collapsed of their embassy compound. So you could use the word, and many in the left-wing mainstream media around the world have used the word escalation to describe what Israel did. To me, Iran had been escalating and escalating and escalating, and this was a response by Israel. Iran's really been escalating since 1979, folks, when that Iranian Revolution, that wicked regime took hold. And guess what? Rarely has the Iranian regime faced any consequences. They always act through proxy, and they call it plausible deniability. I call it implausible deniability, but Iran says, we didn't do it. We can't control those militias in Iraq and Syria who were killing, say, American troops. We didn't give the green light for October 7th when 1,200 Jews were massacred in the biggest massacre, the bloodiest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Wasn't us. They're part of the resistance, as Iran would call it, Hamas and the militias and Hezbollah, but they act independently. We're not our brother's keeper. We don't control their every movement. Maybe not their every movement, but folks, overall, this is a bold-faced lie. Hezbollah does not exist without Iran. It literally does not exist. Hezbollah is Iran West. Southern Lebanon has turned into Iran West. That's what Hezbollah is. It's a fully funded, created arm of the Iranian regime. Secondly, again, arguably, Hamas and Islamic Jihad don't exist without Iran's continued support. And October 7th doesn't happen. Training, arming, everything. And yet Iran has sat back, and not the Iranian people who we love dearly. Hey, Iran is a Bible land. That's ancient Persia. That's Mordecai, Esther, Cyrus, and Darius from your Bible. And the Iranian people are the main victims of this wicked regime. But the regime has sat back and said, we didn't do it. Our hands are clean. Well, Israel's at the point after October 7th, which was the ultimate escalation. We're talking escalation. And after October 8th, when Hezbollah began firing on a daily basis rockets into northern Israel, Israel says enough. We got to go to the head of the snake, the head of the octopus. We got to hit Iran where it hurts. We have to hit them directly. And that's what happened on Monday. And the world doesn't like it. The European Union is howling. The EU, I'm going to pull this up real quick. The EU has condemned what Israel did. And wait to hear what Russia's doing. EU, I'm reading this right from the Times of Israel, condemns attack on Damascus mission that killed top Iranian generals. Wait a minute. Let me preface this by saying Europe, in Iran's view, is an enemy of Iran. Iran has carried out attacks on European soil. It's plotted terror in Europe against Iranian dissidents. It considers Europe an infidel enemy. How craven and weak is this of the EU to release this statement? Instead of standing in solidarity with Israel, it shares common enemies with Israel just as America does. Europe's enemies are Israel's enemies, whether Europe wants to acknowledge it or not, whether the Biden administration wants to acknowledge it or not. They could try to create daylight and distance themselves and save face, distance themselves from reckless Israel, but it doesn't matter. We said last week on the live stream, Iran still groups America and Europe in with Israel. We're all just a big bag of infidels all grouped in together. And you can try to distance yourself from Israel, but it ain't happening. In Iran's eyes, you're one and the same. Great Satan, little Satan. Nonetheless, the Biden administration reportedly on Monday directly contacted Iran and said, hey, we didn't know about this. Hey, we didn't know that Israel was going to do this. The hit on Zahedi in Damascus. How weak. Basically saying, don't hit us. We didn't know. We had nothing to do with this. We swear we didn't do it. How weak. Israel is your greatest ally, if not in the world, at least in the Middle East, your only real ally. And Iran is an enemy of the United States with American blood on its hands. And I'm sure a good chunk of that blood can be traced back to Mohammad Reza Zahedi. Hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. troops in Iraq over the years, killed by Iranian-supplied IEDs and roadside bombs. The list goes on and on and on. An Iranian journalist was just brutally attacked in London last week, most likely by the regime's agents. And you throw Israel under the bus to the Iranians. We didn't do it. It was all them. We had nothing to do with it. Please don't hurt us. How sad. This European statement. Let's read it, folks. The European Union today condemned the airstrike, and it said in this highly tense regional situation. Why is it tense? Tehran. It is imperative to show utmost restraint. This is dictated to Israel, lecturing Israel. The principle of the inviolability of blah, 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 diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected in accordance with international law. This is Diplo speak. saying that Israel is not respecting international law by striking the Iranian embassy. Whereas if I only saw such fiery statements from the EU every time Iran and its proxies violate international law, but I digress. But there you have it. When Israel looks to the West, it sees weak knees, cravenness. I like to say when I talk about Europe today that Winston Churchill, for instance, is turning in his grave. So Israel at times truly feels alone. Here's the good news. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He's still on the throne. And when it comes to his land and his people, he's very much alert and involved. Number two, there are millions upon millions and many thousands watching this live stream right now of Bible-believing Christians who know that this is not just any other country, not any other land. This is God's land. And he has a great plan for the land of Israel, a prophetic plan. And we'll stand with God's land and God's people, come what may. So that brings us to Russia. Russian forces deploying increasingly to that Israel-Syria border. Some facts here, folks. I mentioned earlier on, 2022, Russian forces mainly left. November 2023, they started to come back. And Israel upped its attacks. In Russia's absence from southern Syria, Israel increased its attacks against Iranian assets there, and with good reason. Now Russia's trickling back. And now, since the beginning of this year alone, folks, in only 3 months, we've had 3 Russian military posts established on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. Again, Russian forces staring into Israel. 3 military posts in the past 3 months alone. What's happening here? Why is Russia doing this? More from the Jerusalem Post. I'm just going to read this directly to you from my phone. Bear with me. Here we go. The title of this piece in the Jerusalem Post, A Message to Israel, it asks, Russia deploys more forces in Syria's Golan Heights. The forces from Russia's military police were tasked with de-escalating tensions in the Syrian provinces of Quneitra and Dara. Now, folks, I've been on that Golan Heights, that area, that border region many times. Quneitra, Dara, I've, in previous years, looked across the border, saw plumes of smoke, heard the artillery fire as ISIS and other forces were battling the Assad regime right there on Israel's doorstep. Now Hezbollah, Iran, Russia have moved in. It never ends, but it's right there in the Golan. By the way, the Golan, if you haven't been, beautiful. One of the most beautiful regions in Israel, if not on earth. Fresh air, mountainous, God's creation on full display. Russia's defense ministry announced today that it had deployed additional forces in the Syrian-controlled areas of the Golan Heights, where Israel had allegedly struck at an increasing rate over the last few months. The forces from Russia's military police are monitoring the long-standing ceasefire issued as part of the Syrian civil war. Good luck. But Quneitra and Dara are the places, and according to Russia, military posts belonging to the Syrian military are located below the Russian observation post, set up to monitor, quote, this is key here, folks, possible provocations. Now, pray tell, what could those provocations be, and who would they be from? Israel could be only source of what Russia is talking about there with provocations. So Russia now is perched on Israel's border with Syria. This comes days after, on Monday, Russia roundly condemned that strike in Damascus. No surprise there. There's been some vicious rhetoric by Russia's foreign ministry against Israel in the past 2 years, and we've reported it here in the newscast. So we have the Russian condemnation. Now, the very day, by the way, I mentioned 3 military posts. The 3rd post was just set up on Monday, the day of the takeout of Zahedi. What do we have here? Why? Why is this happening? Folks, number one, it's prophetic. Let's get into that in a second. But let's just mention, I've used this term many times here, talking about the Russia-Iran relationship over the past 2 years. Quid pro quo. Meaning, the Iranian regime has supplied Russia with thousands of attack drones that it's used to great and deadly effect in Ukraine in the past 2 years. It's reportedly also supplying Russia with short range, medium range ballistic missiles. As is North Korea also providing armaments, China, the Gathering Storm Coalition, as they call them, as I call them. So they're helping Russia out in a major way militarily. Yes, Russia needs its armaments, its military stockpiles replenished. It's looking to Iran to replenish them. Secondly, Iran is providing diplomatic cover as much as it can at the UN and in other international bodies. Iran has stood by Russia through thick and thin, as most of the world has condemned Russia for the Ukraine invasion. And Russia, a pariah state in many ways now, Iran certainly a pariah state, and they're grouping together. This is not altogether surprising, but Iran is not doing this out of the goodness of its heart. No, no, no. What does Iran get in return? Folks, I believe one aspect of this relationship, the quid pro quo element, is that Iran has to be pressing Russia and saying, hey, the Zionist entity is pretty much embarrassing us left and right in Syria. And Russia, they're doing it under your noses. I can speak. The Zahedi takeout happened on Monday while thousands of Russian troops were firmly entrenched in Syria. Russia's letting this happen. They've called it a deconfliction mechanism with Israel, where basically Israel gives Russia a heads up, says we're going into Syria, make sure you're not around, and Russia says, okay. Russia has stepped back since they entered Syria. Russia entered Syria in September 2015. Russia has stepped back and said, okay, Israel, operate freely. Is that coming to an end? We have to ask. Is the moment at hand? I've had a sense that that's coming, where eventually Russia is going to lay down the gauntlet and say, Israel, no more. We will not allow you to operate freely in Syria any longer, and strike our good friends and allies, Iran and Hezbollah, and the Assad regime for that matter. Is it at an end? As Russia increases forces right on that border. Here we are. And here we are on the cusp as we close here, I believe, of Bible prophecy. People might say, oh, you can't believe that stuff. Well, guess what? Every prophecy in the Bible has come true. There's a 100% accuracy rate, and there's much still to come. And I believe that Russia will eventually lead. I'm not saying it's tomorrow, not even next year, but eventually, who knows? Could be sooner, could be later. But the key is the groundwork is being laid right now. And we saw it on October 7th. We see with Hezbollah, all the chess pieces falling into place. And the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, describes a war called the War of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but you should know it. And describes a day when Russia, I believe it's Russia, some differ with me, and that's okay. It's not a salvation issue. We just have a different view on that prophetic passage, and that's okay. Russia, Persia, Iran clearly named. I believe Turkey will be involved in that latter days. Ezekiel calls it a latter days confederation that comes against Israel. Now, they don't get very far, not to give away the ending, spoiler alert, but they perish on the mountains of Israel as God intervenes in a way that he hasn't in such a public way in 2,000 years for the entire world to see. That's coming. But Russia, Iran, Turkey, do we see? I leave you with this. What do you think? Is the groundwork being laid right now? Am I completely off base? Never in history have Russia, Iran, and Turkey been so close as they are now. They were at each other's throats for centuries. They fought wars against each other. Now they're all in league. They're all together, and they're all on Israel's border. You do the math. We live, folks, interesting, maybe the understatement of the year. Bible times, I believe, prophetic times. And you know what? We are here right now to be ambassadors for Christ. And you might say, oh gosh, it's so terrible. It's a perilous time. Why am I here now? I wish I lived back then, whenever. Well, God put you on this earth at this particular stage in history for a reason. And for me, I'm going to be an ambassador for Christ. I'm going to try and provide light in the darkness and take advantage of every moment that God Almighty has given me. Jesus never said, hey, until I return, you just sit over there on the couch and you wait for me. I'll be back. Just sit tight. No, no, no. That's not how it works. We are to be proactive as followers of Jesus, as believers. And that could be many ways. You don't have to be talking on YouTube or on TV like I'm doing. Everyone has a role to play. Behind the scenes, in front of the camera, all are equally important. And God is in control. And that's a great thing. I'm going to clutch on to the hem of his garment right now and just say, Lord, lead the way. It's dark, but you're the light, and I want to be with the light. And we'll keep shining that light right here in The Watchman. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on The Watchman. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never